Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
I used to count the seconds my father looked at me. At birthday dinners, I'd watch the flicker of his eyes, how long they stayed on Caleb's latest car restoration project or Thomas's football trophies. When it was my turn to speak, I saw it. The glance, the blink, then the subtle shift of his attention to his wine glass or wristwatch. It wasn't that he disliked me. That would have been easier. He simply didn't see me. "Dad, I got accepted into Caltech," I had said when I was 17, voice trembling with the hope that this time, he might beam with pride. Maximilian Webster looked over his newspaper. "Isn't that in Pasadena?" "Yes, I'm the youngest in the program." He nodded once. "Don't let it distract you from having a real life. No congratulations, no questions, just dismissal wrapped in disinterest." That's how it always was. My brothers were golden. Caleb, the charming eldest, had inherited our father's commanding voice and his love for machinery. Thomas, the middle child, had inherited the temper and the talent for strategy. I was the accident. The quiet one with ink-stained fingers and robotic blueprints tucked in the margins of my notebooks. Growing up, our house was filled with trophies, plaques, and photographs. None of me. Even my mother once whispered in the hallway, "Just give him time, Astrid. You know how traditional he is." Traditional. That was the word we used to excuse his silence. I stopped trying after I won my first international robotics competition at 21. Sent him an article clipping out of habit. He never responded. At Thanksgiving that year, he toasted Caleb's new dealership and Thomas's engagement, but never once mentioned my name. Still, I clung to that one memory. Age 14, science fair, his hand briefly on my shoulder, smiling like he meant it. It was pathetic, but it was mine. "Do you even want to come to my graduation?" I had asked him a few years later. "I'll be at your brother's track meet," he said simply, not even looking up. So I went alone. Valedictorian. Applause. 1,000 people cheering, and no one in the audience for me. Years passed. I built a career from the ruins of that longing. I became the youngest female director at JPL. My name appeared on patents, spaceflight panels, magazine covers. But not once did Maximilian acknowledge it. In his world, my successes were either invisible or inconvenient. But when the invitation to his retirement party arrived, navy paper, silver trim, his name embossed like a monument, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Not for love, that had long been buried. But for one moment, one word, one look of recognition. I said yes. I arrived at the Webster estate in a black dress that didn't cling and heels that didn't click. No one noticed me at first, just how he would have liked it. The house buzzed with laughter, the kind of hollow noise you learn to read after years of corporate banquets. Servers floated by with champagne. Gold balloons spelled out Maximilian, a legacy of excellence. Legacy. Right. My brother stood near the fireplace, surrounded by colleagues and neighbors, all soaking in Maximilian's glory like it was holy light. I spotted the gift table, drowning in crystal bottles and pretentious pens. I walked past it. Instead, I approached him directly, my father, just as he was nodding to some executive in a navy blazer. He looked at me as if I were a distant relative from a side branch he didn't prune himself. "Happy retirement, Dad," I said. He chuckled, already moving on. "Well, find yourself a drink. Speech starts soon." I didn't. I found a corner, and I waited. Minutes later, the lights dimmed. A microphone crackled. My father stepped onto the small podium, clearing his throat with the slow authority of someone used to being heard. "I won't bore you with a long speech," he began, though we all knew he would. I was lucky to raise 2 exceptional sons. Caleb with his brilliance in business, and Thomas, the strategist with a heart. Applause. Whistles. My stomach tightened. I always believed in nurturing potential, and these boys, well, they were built to lead, to conquer. He chuckled. "Not every child turns out the way you hope. But that's life." The crowd laughed politely. A few turned toward me. I didn't blink. And so, he concluded, "I leave behind not just a company, but a legacy carried by men I trust, my boys, my pride." He raised his glass. That was it. No name, no mention, no daughter. I stood up slowly, eyes followed. A murmur passed through the room like wind through dry leaves. I walked to the podium, reached into my purse, and handed him the box. He looked puzzled, but took it. "From your biggest failure," I said evenly. "Enjoy your retirement." And I walked out, leaving the room wrapped in stunned silence. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands still trembling from the weight of my own audacity. The silence wrapped around me, thick and heavy, except for the distant clinking of glasses inside the house. My phone buzzed once, then again. Then it didn't stop. I glanced at the screen, group chats exploding, missed calls from numbers I hadn't saved in years. A cousin texted. What was in the box? Another. That moment. Iconic. Everyone's talking. Confused, I opened a link someone sent. A video was already circulating. The clip was grainy but clear, me walking to the podium, handing my father the box, and uttering those 10 words like a scalpel. "From your biggest failure, enjoy your retirement." Someone had captioned it, "When the overlooked child flips the script." It already had 10,000 views. I put the phone down. For a brief second, I feared I'd made a mistake, but then I remembered the years of being introduced as just Astrid, of him brushing off my patents like hobbies, of being called too intense for daring to build the machines that now roam Mars. I rested my head against the steering wheel. He'll open the box. He won't resist. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas. Thomas. Astrid, what the hell was that? Me. A speech he didn't expect. Thomas, you humiliated him. You made a scene. Me. He made a choice. I just brought a mirror. There was no reply. I didn't care anymore. I'd spent too many years sculpting myself into something I thought he'd finally see. But tonight, I handed him something he couldn't ignore. A truth gift wrapped in memory. He would see the photo. 14-year-old me, holding a medal with robot grease on my cheek, beaming because for one fragile second, his eyes held pride. And beneath it, the note. This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. I'm done now. That was it. No venom. No drama. Just release. And yet, I could feel the air around me shift, like I had disturbed something sleeping. Somewhere in that house, a storm was beginning to gather. 2 days later, the calls stopped. Not because people lost interest, but because something happened. A voicemail from my mother came in just after midnight. Her voice trembled. Astrid, your father collapsed in a study. It wasn't a heart attack. It was something else. Something else. I drove to their estate before sunrise, expecting resistance. Instead, the house was oddly silent except for the distant hum of a medical device. My mother met me at the door, her eyes red-rimmed. He hasn't spoken since he opened the box, she whispered. He just sits there, staring. When I stepped into the study, he was slumped in the leather chair, the photo resting in his lap. My note lay beside him, unfolded, smooth flat like a blueprint. He looked up. His eyes, once sharp and dismissive, were vacant now. Where did you get the photo? He rasped. I answered quietly, you took it, before you forgot who I was. He flinched like I'd struck him. Then, unexpectedly, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive. What's this? A code, he murmured. A robotics design I blocked at JPL. Yours. You weren't supposed to see it succeed. My breath caught. He had sabotaged me. I wanted you to quit, he said, so you'd stay small, manageable. My fingers closed around the flash drive like it was an artifact of betrayal. I'm not small anymore, I whispered. He nodded, silent. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the JPL board, this time with the flash drive in my pocket and no apology in my throat. Ms. Webster, Dr. Suri began, eyeing the projected code on the screen. Can you explain how this algorithm was buried in the archives? I kept my voice calm. It wasn't an accident. My work was submitted through the proper channels 5 years ago. Someone intercepted it. Gasps were exchanged. I didn't flinch. The data spoke for itself. Email chains were routed. File access logs traced to a single name, Maximilian Webster. My father had buried my most groundbreaking project, a robotic stabilization protocol that could have launched KGPL into an entirely new generation of lunar rovers. Why would he do that? One board member muttered. He thought I wasn't ready, I said. Or maybe he just couldn't stand the idea of his daughter outperforming his sons. The board unanimously approved the relaunch of the project, with my name etched on the patent. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment and found an envelope wedged under my door. Inside was a photograph, one I hadn't seen before. I was 12 mid-laugh, covered in grease from building my first circuit spider. My father stood behind me, not smiling, but watching. A note beneath it in shaky handwriting read, "You mattered." I just didn't know how to say it until it was too late. I sat with it for a while, not crying, just breathing. Maybe he meant it. Maybe it came too late. And for the first time, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was mine.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.